That's how winning is done.
What is gaming culture compared to when we were kids, and like where is it headed and where is it now? And I think that it is something that has, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, it was pretty taboo. Like, you had your Super Nintendo sitting in the floor, sun shining outside, your mom's yelling at you, get off the video game, go outside and play. Versus now, where it seems like there just seems to be a little bit more restrictions when you go outside, and people have a lot more freedom in the video game world with the introduction of the internet and things like that. It's a big shift.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good point. The internet changed everything, right? It changed every aspect of our daily life, and
Yeah.
playing video games was definitely one of them. I was a little different. I remember I was actually, funny enough, telling this story the other day. I remember being 5 years old, and a lot of young people aren't going to remember this, but there used to be a store called Sears Roebuck, and
Oh,
you
yes.
probably knew it as Sears, but
Yeah.
it was still Sears and Roebuck back then. They started off with a catalog; they were a catalog company, anyways. Which would actually be a cool story to go into one day. But
Yeah.
I was standing there watching a brand new Nintendo NES coming down the conveyor belt and getting my very first home gaming console. Now, I get it. People our age and a little bit older maybe had Ataris, but this was the very first 8-bit home gaming console that really made it into everybody's house, right? Like, this was the Nintendo, the NES was the very first one that made it into every home.
Yeah. It fundamentally changed how we viewed what we could do with a TV, right? Like, it was no longer something that you just watched the local TV on or like shoved into VHS. It was something that you could control now, and you could make your own story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it became interactive. But what I'm trying to get at, I played video games. My point was I was very excited, and I played video games from a very young age. Was introduced at the age of 5. Absolutely loved them.
Yep.
I equally played as much outside, if not more, as a kid growing up. Video games for me were something I did as a kid when it was raining outside or it was too dark to play outside.
Yep.
That's when I played video games, at night or when it was raining. So I wasn't really ever one of these people that my mom or dad had to, it was quite the opposite. They had to make me come inside instead of go outside. And
and I'm right there with you on that. Like, I loved playing video games as a kid, but we spent so much time just riding bikes with other kids in the neighborhood, or just, roaming the neighborhood, having a good time, that you didn't really get to your console until it was close to bedtime, right? Or the weather was bad and you couldn't get out. But I still loved it. Like, it wasn't something, my first console was the Super Nintendo. I actually got an original NES after I got the Super Nintendo.
Okay. All right. How many, you're what, 6 years younger than me? You're 36?
I'm 37.
37, yeah. So 5. All right. 5, 6.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense, right? I don't know when the NES was released, but the Super Nintendo, I did end up getting one of those as well. And it's not like my family was rich and I had all the cool things. It was just I think I remember for both things, it was like the only thing I got. Dude, it's like that's all I wanted.
And they were stupid expensive. Like, it wasn't
in
comparison, right? You think about it. Like, we talk about how expensive gaming has gotten sometimes, but when the Super Nintendo came out, it was a couple $100, and games were still $30.
Let's look that up. Hold on. Like, go ahead. I'm going to look up what so you want the Super Nintendo?
Yeah, the Super Nintendo. And what was the cost of games, right? Like what is
The Super Nintendo original price. Let's see if I can find it here. Hmm.
and this is like 94 money, right? Or 1990 money.
Yeah. So I'm looking at uh, a Reddit article here.
Hmm.
It's making me prove that I'm not a robot here. And somebody has done this. They've gone through and looked at inflation. It said adjusted for inflation, the Super Nintendo would have been about $439, and the game's coming around 166. That's adjusted.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Inflation.
and
Uh,
and
I
like
can't find
I
where
don't
it
know
was.
about you, but I got a lot of my consoles secondhand. Like my cousins would get a new console and then my parents would give me their console for Christmas, right? Like it wasn't
Mhm. I never got
and so
anything. Okay, so I'm looking at it here. Yeah, you were spot on. I'm looking at an old uh paper article of some sort, and it shows it at listed for two controllers, probably the Mario game, Mario,
mhm,
and the console was $200 right at it, 198. Good call.
yeah.
Yeah, you called that
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I guess that was back in 92.
Yeah. That was a lot of money in 92.
Yeah.
Especially if you weren't like I would say even for a middle class family like in 92, you weren't just dishing out $200 sparingly for a gaming console, right?
So what about let's talk about the culture.
Mhm.
What was the culture like for you back then? When you played now, I was actually a very sports orientated guy. All my
Mhm.
friends were. I played organized sports and also played video games. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like I was made fun of for playing video games. Do you ever remember a time or remember anyone that was made fun of for playing video games or
100%.
really?
So yeah, but and I will say this was probably a circumstance of my living situation. The family I grew up in was not like very outdoorsy. We hunted and fished every weekend. Like even watching TV in my household was taboo on sunny days, right? If if the weather was nice, you just weren't inside. And then like that whole area where I lived, it was also very, and I don't know how much this played into it, but there were a lot of poor people in the area. So if you're the only person with a gaming console in your community, you you are the oddball out, right? So you
Mm.
just didn't talk about it. You enjoyed it to yourself, and you went and hung out with your friends after the fact. You didn't talk about it until unless they were like really close.
So none of your friends had gaming consoles as a kid?
Mm, I think after I got my Super Nintendo, it was probably a couple years before one of my good friends got an N64. Like
Mm.
that was probably the next thing.
See, we had completely different experiences.
Hmm.
I grew up on a street where there were two other boys that were around the same age as me, and we were all very
Hmm.
athletic. They were a year younger than me, and we all played sports athletic, but we also played video games too. And
Hmm.
so all three of us had consoles.
Yeah.
We would go to each other's house and play games. And oh, you remember being able to like, all right, so this was the best part. I remember this part about my childhood. It was a Friday night. You got done with school. You're either having a buddy come over and spend the night, or you're going to spend the night with a buddy.
Hmm.
And what do? You go and you get pizza, or you have
Yep.
pizza delivered. You go to Blockbuster or your local little family video store, and you go rent a video game that
Yep.
you and your buddy are going to
At
play all night.
Blockbuster or movie gallery. Like that
Yeah.
was where
Oh,
you got
dude.
your games to play.
Oh man, that was so. And you'd stay up way too late playing
Hmm.
video games all night long till one of the adults was like
Yep.
screaming at you to go to bed.
Yep. It's because you
The
had 5 days to beat the game before you had to return it. Otherwise, you
That's
had to rent it
exactly right.
again. Like,
Right. Right. Oh man, looking back on it, the '90s were fantastic.
They were
There was a
like,
lot. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but
yeah.
all of this happened in the '90s. The '90s were fantastic. It was kind of a golden age for our
Hmm.
culture.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think that our kids will probably look back if we tell them stories about how we grew up in the 90s, and they will think it's the craziest thing ever. Like they'll think like was it like what in the world was going on? Was it just Lord of the Flies all the time? Like
maybe. I don't know.
but
But
like
so my
back
experience was a little bit different.
yeah.
So we played a lot of video games and nobody judged us for it. It
Hmm.
wasn't I don't ever remember anybody being made fun of. I don't, we were kids and it's what kids
Hmm.
did. And our parents never had to tell us to kick us off the video games because we played outside a lot. And so
Yeah.
we had a really awesome balance. I mean, we
Yeah.
always had something to do. And quite honestly, I think it was our parents probably really enjoyed gaming consoles because when we were inside,
Hmm.
we were doing stuff,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
it wasn't seen back then as rotting your brain. I don't think it was. I nobody ever told me that my brain was rotting because I was playing too many video games.
I don't remember people saying it would rot your video games. What I remember is a group, like not even a group, society not understanding what's going on, right? And when people don't understand a trend, they just take a step back, right? Is kind of the way I remember it, right? We're not going to push this. We're going to maybe steer away a little bit, but we're going to take a measured approach to it. Is the way I remember it.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I can't really speak how the rest of society viewed video games early
Hmm.
on. Um,
I don't remember brain rot until GTA came out.
no, now I do
And
remember.
Mortal Kombat. Sorry, the first Mortal Kombat was really.
Yeah, you remember when they had to
Hmm.
start when
Hmm.
also it was kind of the same movement, video games
Hmm.
and um music,
Yeah.
record labels. Remember when there was
Hmm.
this big push to put labels on them,
Yep.
like parental guidance labels and stuff,
Yeah.
and then video games. But in defense of parents back then, there
Yeah.
was a massive shift in video. They became more violent.
Yeah. There was.
They
Um.
shifted away from the original stuff is, you know, platform games, there was I mean, I guess I don't Wolfenstein, remember? I mean, it was a computer
Hmm.
game. It started as a computer game, but the
Right.
first, and then Doom, that was another one that
Doom.
was
Yeah.
pretty violent.
And
But
yeah, there were some. And like, what do you like? I'm trying to think. What would I do as a parent if this medium comes out? Right. What is my response to this new medium that is very accessible to my child? Like, I don't like. I think
it's
I
only
would
accessible.
probably. I don't know that I would tell my 8-year-old that he could play Mortal Kombat. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think so.
I think just like everything, it's a does the it depends on the maturity of the child.
Right.
Like, you have to look at
Hmm.
every child to be, different. I mean, there's
Hmm.
some kids that are 10 that can handle 8, 9, 10 that can handle
Yeah.
PG-13 film, right?
Yeah.
There's kids that are 13 that can handle rated R movies. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Well,
it
there's
all
kids
depends
that
on
are
the
13 that
maturity of
their
the
lives
child.
are rated R movies, and like it's
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's sad enough. Yeah, 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 but yeah.
yeah,
Um,
but like
you
kind of
know,
back to like the culture of growing up. It really like I don't think that the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo really caused a lot of issues, like as far as like being made fun of and things like that. It really wasn't until like high school when like Halo came out, when a few other things, and like like I don't like, and I was a little bit different than you in I started going to video game tournaments,
yeah, I never competed in anything, no.
right? And nerd was definitely not cool whenever I was in school. Even though I played high school soccer, like I was very involved in sports. and but I also competed in video games. Like it was two different cultures. It was two different mindsets, and there was very little overlap.
Oh, zero. Yeah, you had yes. No, I agree. I do remember. I had two very distinct groups of friends.
Mhm.
I so high school. Yeah, I never competed in anything. No.
Right. And nerd was definitely not cool whenever I was in school. Even though I played high school soccer, like I was very involved in sports, and but I also competed in video games. Like it was two different cultures. It was two different mindsets, and there was very little overlap.
Oh, zero. Yeah, you had yes. No, I agree. I do remember. I had two very distinct groups of friends.
Mhm.
I